This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We spoke with Dan Herbert, Jason Van Dyke's defense attorney, at the bottom of the 7 o'clock hour. Coming up, we have Joe McMahon, who is the Kane County State's attorney and the special prosecutor in the case against Van Dyke. He had this to say on Friday after the verdict.
The end of this trial marks an opportunity for this city to come together. This investigation, this criminal prosecution of Jason Van Dyke, I believe reflects our shared values and has been the result of people simply doing the right thing. Today, our justice system fulfilled its obligation of justice for all.
And, of course, the implications, this is an international story, the implications extend beyond this case and beyond this city and state. And that was the point that Laquan McDonald's uncle, Reverend Marvin Bradley, made at Rainbow Push.
We believe that this fight for justice for Laquan represented a fight for families across this country that have tried over and over again to get justice.
It is worth noting, and I know Joe McMahon is going to discount this because his political and philosophical leanings have nothing to do with his job as a prosecutor. However, since we make mention of people's backgrounds in every other context, then I'm going to make mention of it here. And for all of those Chicago liberals celebrating the Van Dyke convictions, the man responsible who led the prosecution is a white male suburban conservative. Oh, the horror. Well, so maybe, and part of going back to McMahon's statement, part of this kind of shared values unifying event going forward can be dispensing with the nonsense and intellectual poison that is identity politics, which is otherwise celebrated in Chicago.
And Laquan McDonald's great uncle, who you just heard from, he was very candid. It was a very long press conference that he had, and he had mentioned, we were nervous at first. You had this white man from Kane County where you all know, and he looked at him and was like, you all know what it's like to get pulled over in Kane County as a black man. So, and he said, and he praised,
what's it like?
Well, but he praised him for the work that he did.
Yeah.
And thanked him.
So
he said, because others wouldn't believe him, but we believed in this man, and he delivered.
So perhaps a teachable moment on multiple levels here, and that's one of the underreported levels, I would suggest. For more on the prosecution and the verdict, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Kane County State's Attorney, special prosecutor in this case. I think a lot of people forgot that. There was a special prosecutor from outside Cook County in this case, and his name is Joe McMahon, who joins us now. Joe, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here, Dan and Amy. Thanks.
Just the process for you and your team being brought in from outside Cook County to try this politically, racially charged case in Cook County. Give us some background on that.
So maybe 2.5 years ago, I think it was probably June of 2016, I received a letter from Judge Gaughan. I think it was a letter that he sent out to a number of other state's attorneys across the state. I don't know for sure, but I know I'm not the only one. Asking if I was willing to accept the appointment of special prosecutor. And I looked at that. I considered it. I talked to colleagues of mine inside and outside the office about whether I should accept the appointment, what that would mean for our workload internally, and ultimately decided it was the right thing to do. I feel very strongly that the case should have been prosecuted by a public prosecutor, one of the state's attorneys or one of the public prosecutors across the state. And I knew I could put together a team that could do it.
What was What was the biggest challenge you faced?
Probably the workload on this case was immense at times. I mean, the volume of information that was transitioned from the Cook County State's Attorney's office to my office, getting up to speed on that as quickly as possible. And then, the other big challenge, you touched on it just a moment ago, overcoming the public perception of, could I do it? Could we do this case? How would we be received by the community? And this case, because of all of the issues that are, part of the narrative on this case, our work needed to be accepted by the community. And then we needed to be able to deliver on those results in the courtroom.
Most of those reacting who wanted to see Jason Van Dyke convicted are satisfied with the verdict, the conviction for second-degree murder, the 16 counts of aggravated assault with a firearm. Were you satisfied with the verdict? Is that what you anticipated?
I am absolutely satisfied. The jury was incredibly thoughtful, and we certainly watched them during the trial. They were, very attentive. To get to second-degree murder, they had to find that we proved first-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt, and then they worked through the jury instructions and the law on whether or not there's a mitigating factor, and they found that. And they found him guilty of all 16 aggravated battery counts. A big part of our theory that the first shot and all 16 shots were unnecessary, and their verdict's consistent with that theory. So I am completely satisfied and grateful for the work
that the
jury did.
That to me is an important point because, of course, so much was made in the public arena, media, in debate about this 16 shots, and the key here is the first shot was as unlawful as the 16th, according to the jury, so he should have never discharged his weapon. So it just becomes a matter of, the number of times. It's redundant to the first decision they made, which is that he should not have discharged his weapon. That's really a key takeaway from this verdict.
It is. I completely agree. I mean, central to our theme and to our strategy was that he had other options, and he should not have shot that first time.
Well, do you have? Sorry for interrupting. Continue.
It's okay.
Do you feel bad for Jason Van Dyke, and do you realize how stressful being a Chicago police officer is?
Absolutely. I know how stressful it is to be a police officer, and they have an incredibly difficult job, and certainly I feel for Jason's family. I learned a little bit hearing about what they're going through during the course of this trial, and there are a lot of tragedies all around on this case, and Mr. Van Dyke's family is part of that tragedy as well, and I feel for them as well. But my focus had to be, and it has been from day one, on the actions of Jason Van Dyke. And one of the other takeaways from this case is that no one is above the law, that the rule of law we talk about, it applies to everyone, and it applies to a police officer. We put high expectations on them, and they have an incredibly dangerous job, but they have to comply with the law as well.
When the decision was made to put Van Dyke on the stand to testify in his own defense, a decision that we just talked to Dan Herbert, his defense attorney, who said, I don't regret doing that. Ultimately, obviously, it's the client's decision, but I don't regret doing that because Jason felt like I don't want this to be decided by politics, meaning just the judge. I want a jury to hear me out. The jury ultimately in post-verdict interviews suggested they didn't believe Van Dyke. They didn't find him credible. Were you surprised that Van Dyke and his counsel made that decision to testify?
We were prepared either way, but in a self-defense case where their theory was that he was acting to protect his life, I think I'm not second guessing the decision that he and his client made, and he's right. Ultimately, it's a decision that Mr. Van Dyke had to make. So not completely surprised, but as I said, we were ready. We were ready for his testimony.
Herbert also said that the expectation, as the FOP announced, is that they will appeal this decision. He believes, does Herbert, that there are appealable issues, both the decision by the judge not to accede to a change of venue, as well as the jury instructions per what the defense had requested, what the judge decided, and some of the comments by jurors after the fact. For example, Herbert mentioned one juror saying he should have, used something less lethal than his gun initially, and that runs afoul of the jury instructions. How do you respond to the possibility of an appeal and those as appealable issues?
Well, every criminal conviction results in an appeal, so it doesn't surprise me that they're saying there's going to appeal. There is an appeal in every criminal case. We went through extensive pretrial hearings on the change of venue issue. The judge heard from two experts, one that we brought in who was local and one that they brought in from another state. And then to follow up on that, the judge went through really detailed jury questioning, individual questioning about people's ability to be fair. And if they did know something about the case prior to its start, would they have the ability to set that aside and make a decision based on just what they heard during the trial? And that was made crystal clear during jury selection. So, well, I recognize that that'll be an appeal. We're prepared for that, and I'm confident in the approach that Judge Gaughan implemented and followed in this case.
What do you expect to happen at the sentencing hearing? How many years do you think he'll get behind bars? Can you predict that, or any thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm not going to predict that. We're just starting. I mean, we have done some preliminary work on sentencing issues, but I'm going to restrict my comments to what sentencing should be once we're in court at that sentencing hearing. Ultimately, that's a judicial decision. That is, I can make a recommendation, but ultimately that's a decision for Judge Gaughan to make.
Dan Herbert, Van Dyke's defense attorney, suggested he may be facing as few as 6 years in prison. That seems like that sentence would not be received well from the public. Perhaps it wouldn't be received well by you either. Can you give us a sense of order of magnitude? Are we talking about a sentence that's likely counted in decades and not individual years?
What I'm prepared to do is talk about the possibility, and you both and your listeners know what that range is. On second-degree murder, under the law, he's eligible for probation, and if he's sentenced to prison, the range is between 4 and 20 years. On the aggravated battery counts, the sentencing range, it is a mandatory prison sentence, and that range is between 6 and 30. So we'll confine our arguments to the sentencing range, and again, that's a decision for Judge Gaughan to make.
You heard what I said at the outset, and I sort of anticipated your answer, but I'll ask the question to get your answer anyway, which is, just the nature of sort of what you said in your post-verdict comments that about shared values and the idea that, frankly, your profile, white, suburban, male Republican can go try a case in Cook County against a white cop, essentially on behalf of a black young man, and people can be satisfied across the range of races and every other identity under the sun that the case was prosecuted fairly, at least those that believe Van Dyke was to be convicted. And the point is, even those who didn't, the story, at least this specific case, the four corners of this case, becomes much less about race or any other identity in the process, and it's about the facts and the rule of law, as you suggested.
People across this state and across this country expect honesty. They expect its public servants to work hard and to do that work with integrity. And that message resonates across every corner and every community and across the spectrum, the political spectrum of this state. And that's what I knew we would bring, and that's what we did our best to make sure we did in this case.
Dan Herbert said that that verdict will result in Chicago police officers becoming security guards. Is that a concern? Do you have a comment about that comment?
the police officers that I know go to work every day, and they work hard, and they put their lives on the line. They make personal sacrifices. It takes an incredible toll on them immediately or emotionally, and I know they'll continue to do that. They go to work because they believe in protecting the public, and I'm grateful for that, and I believe that police officers will continue to do that across this country.
He is Joe McMahon. He's the Kane County State's Attorney who was the special prosecutor in the Jason Van Dyke case. Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, both of you. Have a great day.
You too. Yep. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper, hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Look at his